The next morning, Walter Roberts sat at his desk, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like 1,000 pounds. His hand shook as he reached for the pen, his thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. For the past hour, he had been staring at the documents in front of him. His will, his inheritance plan, all the things that had been passed down from generation to generation. This was the moment he had been dreading, yet here it was, staring him in the face. He had never imagined it would come to this. He had never imagined that his own flesh and blood would drive him to this point. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper echoed in the silence of the study. Walter's eyes narrowed as he signed his name, feeling an odd sense of finality settle over him. He had made up his mind. His children, his grandchildren, would no longer have access to the wealth he had worked his entire life to build. They had shown him no respect, no appreciation. Ethan's words had cut deeper than anything he could have imagined, and in that moment, Walter knew there was no turning back. As he finished the last line on the page, he pushed the documents aside and leaned back in his chair. His mind raced with the consequences of his actions. Would they fight him? Would they be angry? Would they even care? He had spent so many years building his legacy, but it had always been for them. For his children, for his grandchildren. He had hoped they would one day understand the sacrifices he had made, the years of hard work, the sleepless nights. But now, that hope was gone. Ethan's words had shattered it all. Walter knew his decision would cause a stir, but he didn't care anymore. His heart was hard, his resolve stronger than it had ever been. He could already imagine the look on his children's faces when they received the news. His son, Daniel, would be furious. He had always believed that Walter owed him something, that he was entitled to his father's wealth just because he was the eldest. But Walter had never agreed with that notion. He had always taught his children that they needed to earn their way in life, not rely on handouts. His daughter, Sarah, would probably try to reason with him, to make him see that family was more important than money. But Walter had heard that argument before, and it had never held any weight with him. Family was important, yes, but respect was more important. And Ethan? Ethan would probably be the most affected. He was young, brash, and had never understood the value of hard work. He had always assumed that Walter would leave him everything, that he would inherit the life that his grandfather had built. But not anymore. Walter had decided that Ethan and the rest of the family would have to live without him, without the safety net of his wealth. The next few days passed in a blur as Walter finalized the details of his decision. He sent the documents to his lawyer, made sure everything was in order. He didn't want any mistakes. The family would be informed soon, and there would be no going back. When the day finally came for him to notify them, Walter sat down at the dining table with his children and grandchildren, his heart pounding in his chest. They looked at him, waiting for him to speak, unaware of the bombshell he was about to drop. Walter took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over their faces, and then he spoke. "I've made some decisions," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You are all being disinherited. You will receive nothing from me, not 1 cent. The family legacy ends here." The room went silent, the shock hanging in the air like a thick fog. Walter didn't look away, didn't flinch. This was it, the moment that would change everything. His children, his grandchildren, all of them would have to figure things out on their own. And in that moment, Walter felt a strange sense of peace. He had made the right decision. At least, that's what he told himself. "I told myself that I had done the right thing." The decision was made. But as the days passed, Walter Roberts could feel the weight of his choice bearing down on him. His house, once filled with the laughter and chatter of family, felt eerily quiet. The walls seemed to close in around him, as if the very foundation of his life was crumbling. He had spent decades building something he thought would last, something that would outlive him. And now it was all gone. The shock of his announcement still hung in the air like a thick cloud. The morning after, his children didn't speak to him. They were angry, hurt, and confused. But Walter had made it clear that there would be no going back. There was nothing left for them in his will, no inheritance, no safety net. They would have to live without the family fortune. His son Daniel was the first to confront him, but Walter had expected that. Daniel had always believed he was entitled to his father's wealth, just because he was the eldest. "How could you do this, Dad?" Daniel's voice was filled with disbelief and anger as he stood in the doorway of Walter's study. "You've worked your whole life for this. You can't just throw it all away. We're your family." Walter didn't flinch. "Family? You think family means anything when there's no respect? No, Daniel. I've had enough. Daniel's face reddened with frustration. You'll regret this. You can't just disown us. Walter shook his head slowly. I've thought this through. It's the right thing to do. His daughter Sarah didn't say much. She just stood in the corner, looking disappointed but saying nothing. Sarah had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to keep everyone together, but even she knew this time was different. When Ethan finally came to see him, his attitude was the most shocking of all. Ethan, the one who had sparked this entire situation, didn't come with anger or bitterness. Instead, he came with something else, apathy. I don't know what you expect from me, Grandpa. Ethan said, shrugging. I didn't ask for any of this. Walter couldn't hide his frustration. You've made it clear how you feel. You said it yourself, Ethan. The best gift is when I'm gone. Well, you got your wish. Ethan stared at him, unblinking. You're right, I did say that. But I didn't mean it like this. It's just, well, you've been impossible to deal with for years. We all have our issues, Grandpa. But this? It's extreme. Walter's heart pounded in his chest. Extreme? You've got no idea what extreme is, Ethan. You have no respect for me, for what I've done, and you won't even try to understand. There was a long silence before Ethan finally sighed and turned to leave. I guess we'll see how this plays out. But don't expect me to be sorry. The door clicked shut behind him, and Walter was left alone with his thoughts. Alone with the consequences of his decision. He had expected them to fight him, to plead with him, but not like this. He had expected some form of emotional reaction, anger, regret, maybe even guilt. But what he had received was indifference. It stung more than he cared to admit. The days turned into weeks, and Walter's isolation grew. The phone calls stopped. His children didn't come by, not even for holidays. He had cut them off completely, and they had done the same to him. It wasn't the freedom he had imagined. It was loneliness. A loneliness that seeped into his bones, leaving him with nothing but time to reflect on his choices. Had he been too harsh? Had he been too quick to cut ties? The family he thought he was protecting had turned their backs on him. And now, it seemed, he had lost everything. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow still the right choice. He had no regrets, at least, not yet. But the silence was deafening. He had severed the ties, but now he wondered what it would take to rebuild the family he had once known, or if it was even possible. I thought about it every day. Walter Roberts had never imagined that his life would feel so hollow. He had spent decades building a family legacy, a fortune that was meant to carry on for generations. Yet, in the wake of his decision to disinherit everyone, he found himself questioning everything. The silence was crushing. The phone never rang. No one came to visit. The house, once filled with life, felt like a mausoleum. His thoughts kept circling back to the same point. Had he made a mistake? Had he let his pride get in the way of something truly important? Days bled into weeks, and the loneliness grew. It wasn't just the absence of his family that hurt. It was the realization that he was now completely alone. It wasn't the way he had envisioned his final years. He had always imagined his children and grandchildren coming to him, sitting around the table, asking for advice, seeking his wisdom. But that was a dream long lost. Ethan had made his feelings clear that day, but Walter hadn't anticipated the emptiness that would follow. The young man he had tried so hard to guide had turned his back on him without a second thought. Walter sat in his study one afternoon, staring out the window at the yard he had carefully tended over the years. The garden was wild now, overgrown with weeds that no one had bothered to pull. He used to take pride in the way everything looked. Everything had a place, a purpose. But now, it seemed like everything was falling apart. His life, his family, his legacy, all of it seemed so distant. The decision he had made was meant to be an act of strength, of reclaiming his dignity. But now, it felt like weakness. What was the point of wealth if it was no longer shared? What was the purpose of building something so grand if there was no one to pass it to? Walter had no answers, just questions. One evening, as he sat alone at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from him where his wife used to sit, he wondered if she would have understood. She had passed away years ago, but he could still hear her voice in his head, asking him to be kinder, to be more forgiving. She had always been the heart of the family, the one who held everything together. Without her, Walter had let his pride take over. It was a hard pill to swallow. He had always prided himself on being strong, independent, but now, with nothing left, He felt weaker than ever. Just when he thought he couldn't take the silence any longer, there was a knock at the door. It was late, but Walter found himself walking toward it, his heart racing. He opened the door to find his daughter Sarah standing on the other side. Her face was tired, but there was something else in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Concern. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I came to talk. We need to fix this. I need you to understand that we love you. We just don't know how to reach you anymore." Walter didn't know how to respond. He had been waiting for this moment, but when it came, he found himself speechless. Sarah stepped inside, sitting down at the table. "You've pushed us all away, Dad. We can't live like this. You're isolating yourself, and it's hurting you more than you realize." Walter's heart twisted. She was right. He had isolated himself, but it wasn't easy to admit. He had never been one to show vulnerability, but Sarah wasn't here to judge him. She was here because she still cared. And that, more than anything, made Walter question everything again. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild the bridges he had burned. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for reconciliation. Sarah didn't stay long, but she left him with one final thought. "Think about it, Dad. Don't let your pride win." And with that, she was gone. Walter sat in the silence that followed, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It was full of possibility. For the first time in weeks, Walter allowed himself to feel something other than regret. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. I don't know why, but Walter couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Sarah. Her words echoed in his mind long after she left. "Don't let your pride win." They were simple, yet they carried so much weight. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him like that. No one had tried to reach him. No one had cared enough to break through the walls he had built. But Sarah did. And for the first time in a long while, Walter felt the tight grip of his pride loosen. He sat alone in his study, staring at the fireplace, the warmth from the fire doing little to comfort him. He had never expected Sarah to be the one to come to him. His mind had been consumed with thoughts of Ethan, of Daniel, of the decisions he had made. But Sarah, his quiet, thoughtful daughter, was the one who had come. The one who had seen through the hardened exterior he had created over the years. He had always tried to be the strong, unshakable patriarch of the family, the one who held everything together. But in the silence that followed Sarah's visit, he realized how fragile everything had become. His pride had cost him more than he cared to admit. He looked out the window, his gaze drifting across the lawn, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The world outside seemed so much quieter now. Walter had spent his life building walls, thinking they would protect him. But in the end, those walls had trapped him. The decision to disinherit his family had seemed so final, so certain, but now, in the quiet of his own home, it felt like the biggest mistake he had ever made. The thought of facing his children again, of admitting that he had been wrong, seemed impossible. But something inside him was beginning to shift. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could rebuild the relationships he had destroyed. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. He would have to swallow his pride, admit his faults, and hope that his family would be willing to forgive him. But for the first time in weeks, Walter felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't ready to give up on his family. Not yet. The next day, after hours of thinking and weighing his options, Walter picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number. It rang several times before she answered, her voice soft and cautious. "Hello," she said. "Sarah, it's Dad," Walter said, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. I've been thinking a lot about what you said." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. "Dad, I'm glad to hear that. I just want you to know that we're not angry with you. We just want you back. We miss you." Walter swallowed hard, the lump in his throat thickening. "I miss you too, Sarah. I miss all of you." He paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "I made a mistake. A big one. And I'm sorry. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The words felt heavy, but they were the truth. Walter had never been good at admitting his mistakes, but now, with everything on the line, he found himself doing just that. "Dad," Sarah's voice cracked, and for the first time in years, Walter could hear the emotion in her voice. "You don't have to do this alone. We can fix this. Together." Her words felt like a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge. He wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in so long, Walter felt like there was a way forward. A path back to his family. He wasn't sure what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, he had hope. Hope that things could be repaired, that his family could come back together. It was a long road ahead, but Walter was ready to take the first step. And as he hung up the phone, a sense of peace washed over him. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. It had been a week since Walter made that phone call, and though he felt a sense of relief, the reality of what he had done still weighed heavily on him. The silence that once felt oppressive now felt like a challenge, one he had to face head-on. He knew that repairing the damage he had caused wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he was actually looking forward to seeing his family again. He had spent so many years pushing them away, thinking it would make him stronger, more independent. But now, he realized that it was those very walls he built that had made him feel so small and isolated. The evening he'd spoken with Sarah still lingered in his mind. It had been an emotional conversation, one that had opened up a part of him he had kept closed for so long. The truth was, Walter had missed them all, his children, his grandchildren. The house felt too big without their presence. It was hard to accept, but he knew that if there was any hope for healing, it had to start with him. Walter wasn't sure what to expect when he called his son Daniel. Their relationship had been strained for years, especially since Walter had made the decision to disinherit everyone. But he knew this was the next step. He dialed Daniel's number, his heart pounding in his chest. The phone rang several times before Daniel picked up. "Hello." Daniel's voice was guarded, as if unsure of what this call was about. "Daniel," Walter said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's Dad. I wanted to talk to you." There was a pause on the other end. "What about?" Daniel asked, his tone skeptical. "About everything," Walter replied. "About what I did. About how I've treated you and the family. I was wrong, Daniel. I made a mistake. I disinherited all of you, and I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." There was silence for a moment. Walter could almost hear Daniel processing the words, weighing whether or not to accept his apology. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You're sorry? After everything you've done, now you're sorry?" His voice was laced with frustration, but there was something else there, something softer, almost vulnerable. Walter took a deep breath. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Daniel, but I'm asking for it anyway. I can't change the past, but I want to try and make things right." Daniel didn't respond immediately, and for a few seconds, the silence felt unbearable. Then, finally, he sighed. "I don't know, Dad. It's hard. I've been angry at you for so long. But I guess I'm willing to try too. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but maybe we can start over. Just don't expect everything to be okay overnight." Walter felt a knot loosen in his chest. "I don't expect it to be easy, Daniel. I just want to try." The conversation ended with a quiet promise to talk again soon. But for Walter, it felt like a small victory. He had taken the first step toward repairing his relationship with his son, and it was a step in the right direction. He knew that there would still be challenges ahead, that rebuilding trust would take time. But for the first time in a long while, Walter felt a spark of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still a chance for his family to heal. That night, Walter sat in his study, the quiet of the house surrounding him. He looked at the framed photo of his late wife on his desk, her smiling face a reminder of the love they had shared. It had been so easy to forget, so easy to push everything away. But now, he was ready to face the truth. His family was worth fighting for. And for the first time in years, he was finally ready to do just that. The days following Walter's conversation with Daniel were a blur of mixed emotions. He felt a sense of cautious optimism, but the weight of his actions still hung over him like a shadow. He had made progress with Daniel, but there was still so much left to repair, so much distance to cover. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in years, Walter felt like he had a real chance at reconciliation. After his phone call with Daniel, he found himself wondering about the rest of the family. He hadn't spoken to Ethan in weeks, not since the day of the shocking remark that had set everything in motion. Walter knew that Ethan was just as hurt as the rest of them, maybe more so. It wasn't just about the inheritance or the wealth. It was about the relationship that had been broken. Walter had always hoped that Ethan would come around on his own, but now, he realized that hope wouldn't get him anywhere. It was up to him to reach out, to be the one to make the first move. That evening, he sat at his desk, staring at the phone. It had been so long since he'd had a conversation with his grandson, and the thought of calling him felt daunting. But Walter knew it had to be done. With a deep breath, he dialed Ethan's number. The phone rang twice before Ethan picked up. "Hello." His voice was flat, emotionless, and it hit Walter like a punch to the gut. "Ethan," Walter began, trying to steady his voice. "It's Grandpa. I wanted to talk to you." There was a long silence on the other end. Walter could almost hear Ethan's hesitation. He knew the younger man was still angry, still hurt, and he didn't blame him. "What do you want, Grandpa?" Ethan finally replied, his voice cold. "I know you're upset," Walter said, his heart heavy. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need to apologize. I've made a terrible mistake, Ethan. And I'm sorry for the way I treated you. For the way I treated all of you." There was another long pause, and Walter could feel the tension building, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know what you want me to say, Grandpa." Ethan finally spoke, his words softer now, but still guarded. "You kicked me out of your life. You disinherited me. You threw me and the rest of the family away without even thinking." Walter felt the sting of Ethan's words, but he knew they were true. He had been harsh, unyielding, and it had cost him everything. "I know," Walter said, his voice breaking a little. "And I regret it. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were, but I want to start somewhere. I want to rebuild what we had, even if it takes time. I don't want to lose you, Ethan. I don't want to lose any of you." The silence on the other end was almost suffocating. Walter didn't know if Ethan would ever be able to forgive him, but he had to try. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I don't know if we can fix everything, Grandpa. I really don't. But I don't want to keep hating you. I don't want to carry this around forever." Walter felt a weight lift from his shoulders, though he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But it was a start. "Thank you, Ethan," Walter said, his voice filled with gratitude. "That means more to me than you'll ever know." The conversation ended on a hopeful note, though neither of them knew what the future held. As Walter hung up the phone, a sense of peace washed over him, and he allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The walls he had spent years building were starting to crumble, and with each crack, he saw a glimpse of the family he had lost. He wasn't sure how long it would take to heal, but for the first time in a long while, he believed it was possible. Walter knew he had a long road ahead, but he was ready to walk it. For his family. For himself. Weeks passed, and Walter began to notice small changes. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but the conversations with his children and grandchildren slowly started to become more frequent. They weren't perfect, and the scars of the past still lingered in the air between them, but there was a shift. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It wasn't about the inheritance. It was about something deeper, something Walter had ignored for too long: connection. One evening, as Walter sat in his favorite armchair, looking out the window at the sunset, his daughter Sarah called. Her voice, soft but steady, filled the silence in the room. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked. Walter could hear the weight in her tone, the mix of hope and uncertainty. He took a deep breath, his fingers tapping gently on the armrest. "Of course, Sarah. I've been waiting for this." They had agreed to meet in person the next day, and for the first time in years, Walter was actually looking forward to it. The next afternoon, Sarah arrived at his house, her face a little worn, but there was something different about her, a sense of warmth, a softness he hadn't seen in her for a long time. She entered the living room and sat down across from him, her eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking about everything," Sarah began, her voice quiet. "And I want to say thank you, Dad, for reaching out, for trying." Walter's chest tightened at the words. He hadn't expected a thank you, especially not after all that had happened. He wasn't sure what to say, so he just nodded. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes," he finally said. "And I know that it's going to take time to fix things. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Sarah. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose the family." Sarah looked at him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "We don't want to lose you either, Dad. But it's not just about fixing things. It's about moving forward, together. And that means being open with each other. No more secrets." Walter felt a pang in his heart. It had always been easier to shut down, to keep things locked away. But Sarah was right. If they were going to heal, it had to start with honesty. "I've been closed off for too long," he admitted. "I pushed you all away because I thought it would make me stronger. But it only made me weaker." Sarah smiled softly, a mix of sadness and understanding in her eyes. "I know, Dad. We've all been hurt, but we can't keep carrying that pain around forever. It's time to move on. And I think I think we're ready to start. Walter nodded, his throat tight. It wasn't easy, but he knew she was right. They all had to start somewhere, and this was as good a place as any. As the conversation continued, they talked about the past, about the things they had all been too afraid to say. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was a start. The first of many. Later that evening, after Sarah left, Walter sat in his chair, reflecting on the day. He realized that even though there was still work to do, there was hope. He hadn't lost his family. They hadn't given up on him, and he wasn't going to give up on them. The healing process wouldn't be quick, and there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, Walter felt like he could see a way forward. He had started something that might just lead to the reconciliation he had longed for. It wasn't about wealth or legacy or the things he had spent his life building. It was about love. It was about family, and Walter was finally ready to fight for it. The weeks following that conversation with Sarah marked the beginning of a transformation for Walter. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but each day brought a small piece of healing. The distance that had once felt insurmountable was starting to shrink. It wasn't going to be an easy path, but it was a path he was willing to walk. His relationship with Sarah had begun to mend, and he was now determined to reach out to the rest of the family. The first step was to rebuild the trust he had broken. Walter knew that would take time, but at least there was movement now. Real, tangible progress. One evening, after dinner, he picked up the phone again. This time, it was Daniel. Their relationship had been strained for years, ever since Walter had made his fateful decision. He wasn't sure how Daniel would react, but he had to try. He dialed the number, his fingers trembling slightly. The phone rang 3 times before Daniel answered. "Dad." Daniel's voice was cautious, almost hesitant. Walter's heart tightened, but he steadied himself. "Yeah, it's me. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to talk. I think it's time we both stopped pretending everything's fine when it isn't." There was a pause, then Daniel sighed. "I don't know what to say, Dad. After everything, I don't know how to just forgive and forget. It's not that simple." Walter nodded, even though Daniel couldn't see it. "I don't expect it to be simple," he said quietly. "But I do expect it to be real. I can't undo what I did. I can't take back the things I said, but I can be honest with you. I was wrong, Daniel. And I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to forget, but I am asking for a chance to start over." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Walter wondered if his son had hung up. But then Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now, less guarded. "You really mean that, don't you?" Daniel asked. "I do," Walter replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've thought a lot about it, and I want to make things right. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose the family. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were, but I'm willing to try," Daniel said after a moment. "I'll give you a chance, Dad, but don't expect everything to be fixed overnight." Walter felt a weight lift off his shoulders, though he knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. "I don't expect it to be fixed overnight," he said. "I just need to know we're moving in the right direction." The conversation ended on a tentative but hopeful note. As Walter set the phone down, a sense of calm settled over him. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. The walls he had built were slowly coming down, piece by piece. He was learning to let go of his pride, to make room for the people he had once pushed away. Later that week, Walter received a message from Ethan. It was short, but it was a start. "We should talk sometime." His heart skipped a beat. Ethan had never been the one to initiate contact, and the mere suggestion that they speak again filled Walter with cautious optimism. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had hoped for. As he looked out the window, the sun setting on the horizon, Walter realized that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and he was finally on the right path. It was going to take time, but he was ready to walk it. For the first time in years, Walter truly believed that his family could come back together. And with that hope in his heart, he knew he had everything he needed to move forward. In this deeply emotional family story, a man who has spent his life building wealth and legacy finds himself at odds with his children and grandchildren after a series of hurtful remarks from his grandson. Torn by pride and resentment, he makes the drastic decision to disinherit his entire family, only to find that the isolation that follows is far worse than he anticipated. As he reflects on his choices, the weight of his actions becomes overwhelming, and the desire to mend broken ties grows stronger with each passing day. With each phone call and conversation, he slowly begins to rebuild the connections he had shattered. realizing that the true value of family is far more important than material wealth. This story delves into the complicated emotions that often arise in family stories, showcasing how a man's heart can soften through regret and self-reflection, and how even the most fractured relationships can find a path toward healing when love and understanding begin to replace pride and stubbornness. As he navigates the rough waters of reconciliation, he discovers that family stories aren't defined by the mistakes we make, but by the willingness to forgive and grow together. The road ahead may be difficult, but it is one he is determined to walk with his family. These family stories are not just about the past, but about forging a new future together, learning from mistakes, and finding strength in the bonds that hold them all together. Ultimately, this journey of redemption in family stories reminds us that healing takes time, but love and effort can restore what once seemed lost.